was it? I remember I was working with a soldier there on his post-traumatic stress in Israel. And he had been in the front lines, and he said the first thing they do is they teach us to not think and then to not feel. And that's what we need to survive on those front lines, right? But he said, but now he was becoming a therapist. He said, how do I turn the switch back on? I need to think, I need to feel. And so the kind of warriorship that we're building, we don't want people to have to turn that off. We want to turn that on. We want all yourself here.
Many of you know, Israel and Palestine have been through quite a traumatic period, and it continues to unfold. We are for sure looking at not just a conflict that's happening in the world and a trauma that's happening in the world, but that trauma is happening in both societies. Trauma that's happening in the communities, trauma that's happening among certain families, and certainly inside of each one of us individually. I'm happy to be here with Dr. Gary Reiss. He is a process-oriented psychologist therapist. He's been doing process work for quite some time, and he's actually been coming to Israel for over 30 years, teaching and facilitating process work in many different kind of domains, not just in healing and trauma work, but also in conflict resolution, peace work, world work. He'll say more about that later. I'm also very happy I'm especially happy to be with Gary because he also practices Aikido, just like me. We're facilitating a workshop together here in May called Healing a Polarized World, Process Work and Aikido, bringing together the principles and practices of both. Gary, nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
This is going to be gearing towards the workshop that we're going to be offering in May, but maybe it's good to give a little bit of background and lay out some of the parameters and areas that we're going to be working with. We'll get to Aikido. Why don't we just start with process work and maybe some type of shadow work, trauma work, healing work.
So process work was founded by Dr. Arnold Mindell. And I think that was back in the 70s. He was in Zurich, and he was one of the main dream therapists at the Jung Institute. And he got this idea that he wanted to carry on Jung's work. Jung had died. And so he expanded Jungian dream work. He started with the body. So his first idea was the dream body, that our bodies are dreaming. They're not just having physical function, they're dreaming. And then he just expanded that. He said, in relationships, we're dreaming. It's not just problems, who does the dishes and all that. There's a lot of dreaming goes on there. And so process work is very broad in that way. And it also works in many ways. Like, we don't just talk with people. That's one of the reasons I think there's so many Aikido people in process work, because we work with people in movement. We work with dreams, we work with visualization, we work with relationship, we work with art, creativity.
In one way, like process work or any type of therapeutic process, when it's effective, the dots get connected. The disintegrated parts of the self start to reintegrate. And what I hear you saying, that sometimes that can happen perfectly well, effectively through some type of conversation or going into a process through talking. But you, in process oriented, you used several different modalities to help that integration happen, to help connect the dots.
That's right. And where I would have ended up bringing something in like Aikido to my process work was that it really started with grounding the dreaming process in the body.
Can I ask you just a quick question? Do you mostly work with groups, or do you ever do individual therapy with
Oh yeah, no, I do individuals every day. I mean,
okay, so that's your main
I've had a private practice for about 45 years.
Okay,
And
so, yeah.
I once asked Mindell, I said, he was so famous. He was like working with presidents of countries always. And I said, why do you keep your private practice? And he said, it's, first of all, my connection with people, but he said, it's where I learn.
Almost daily, I'm leading meditators through meditation interviews.
Yes.
The process. And it's yeah, that's where that's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, group work is important, but in the end, we all have to do our own healing. And
That's
often, always at some point in that process, we need somebody who can help us heal.
You
somebody
got,
to hold our hand through that process.
you got it. You got it. I mean, a lot of what I'm doing these days, that I'm 71 now, and I want to train a lot of younger facilitators. So I have at least 3 classes a week where I'm training people in facilitation. And one of the things that Mendel said, he said, if you look at the world, one of the things the world lacks the most is facilitation, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, look at what happens between countries. How, I mean, sometimes you have diplomacy, but that's like, okay, you do this and I'll do that. We'll make an agreement, then we'll fight again next year or something like that. But really deep facilitation, you see very rarely. I remember Mendel said to me years ago, he said, if you could give me, back then, I think it was Yasser Arafat, I forget who, maybe it was Rabin, maybe it was somebody else. He said, give me those leaders, give them to me for a weekend and let me facilitate.
Yeah.
Facilitation's really powerful, and he was doing it with the United Nations, and we're doing it all over. We'll be teaching or facilitating when we come to Israel. We'll be in Germany, we'll be in Croatia, we'll be in England, we'll be working with the trauma team in Palestine, we'll be in Israel, and then later in the year we'll be in Kenya, we'll be in Japan, we'll be in Thailand. You know, just there's such a need everywhere in the world for facilitation.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about let's talk about Israel for a second. But I think that the work that we're going to be focusing on right now, because we've been through a war, we're still in a war. In fact, it's kind
Still
of
in a war.
reignited. Um, there is just so much pain on both sides, surely. My feeling is that we need to do some healing within our own community, within our own society first before we start to reach across borders and vice versa. Now, somebody like you coming here and then going Palestine, fantastic. But the work is going to be really, we suffered a collective trauma since October 7th. I don't know anybody who hasn't been affected in a pretty bad way. The trauma here is collective. It's said that this is the biggest single day attack on Jews since the Holocaust. So it's a big deal, and everybody here has been shaken to the core, including me. Um, First, what can you say about that? And then let's talk about how we're going to, the work that we're going to do.
When I was there many, many years ago, Miles, there was a workshop in Tel Aviv with conflict resolution leaders from all over the world. There was somebody there who said at that time, and this was a long time ago, that in her research as a clinical psychologist, at least 2/3 of the children in Palestine and a very similar number in Israel have post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Oh, for sure.
But so what was happening when we were working with Israeli Jews and Palestinians was that it broke down eventually because the sides would fight over whose trauma was worse and therefore who deserved attention.
That's the beginning and the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's the whole ball of wax
That's
right there.
Yeah, exactly. And so we said, well, this isn't working. So we developed a program called Healing History. And healing history is about helping everybody with their trauma, helping all the sides. It's a kind of unusual facilitation. It's not like we're putting them in the same room together. We go to Israel and we work with them on their trauma. We go to Palestine and we work with them on their trauma. Why? Because unresolved trauma leads to further war perpetually,
It
because
leads to traumatizing.
every incident that comes up brings up every unprocessed trauma that both sides carry in any war. And so you've got to start cleaning out. It's like in a relationship, right? If two people, they say in internal family systems that almost nothing that happens between a couple has to do with the couple.
Yeah.
People carry so much trauma that they're reacting. And one of the things, finally I've learned in Aikido is how to do something besides react, right? It's so you've got to break that reactive cycle, and that means you've got to help people with their trauma. What happened in Israel was not only horrible that day, but it reconstituted all of our trauma, those of us who have Holocaust backgrounds, those of us who, and so it brings up everything. And it's very hard to keep our center in the middle of that, right? And so how do you remember that center when all of your trauma is stimulated? So what we try to do is help both sides to process that trauma as a way to taking off some of the pressure that leads to war. One time when I was working in Israel, the tension was so great. And I asked at that time a Palestinian, I said, what's it like? And they said, oh, the pressure's so both sides. Maybe if we just can fight and let go and see some blood, there'll be some release of this inner pressure. But we want to release that inner pressure in a different way, right? So
Yeah.
we're trying to say, we understand those feelings. There's no judgment. If your
Right.
side is hurt, you want to hurt the other side. The only thing that changes that is when you've done it enough that you realize it's not going to work. It doesn't work. And the world is at this turning point where the world needs some other means.
The whole point of the whole key to this work, therapeutic methodologies or process methodologies aside, the key to it is the awareness, because be it interpersonal conflict, because interpersonal relations are far more complex, we need far more awareness.
You got
Because
it.
conflict is far more subtly complex, we need far more subtle awareness. And then in addition to that, we have to have some skillful means on
Yeah.
how.
Do you know what has happened? I've seen it many times when two groups actually in process work are on the verge of violence. So
Mhm.
what we do is we tell them that they don't have to put their violence away, but they have, if they're moving towards each other, they have to move incredibly slow and with awareness. And what has happened, I've seen it over and over again, is that the two sides end up embracing. Now that's really, really strange. But
Mhm.
there is something going on where facilitated
And it's
conflict,
all nonverbal. I'm assuming that it's just energetically moving towards each other. And as they move into more intimate space, basically, where
yeah,
normally they would have knives out. But since
yeah,
it's not that, they're bringing all their energy to it, and the intimate space processes things to where they can realize that they're exactly the same in the trauma. They're exactly the same in the
yeah,
anger, the
yeah.
fear.
That's the point. You and I know that the only answer really to this is for people to do their trauma work and to, when they're ready, again, to bring sides that have fought together to once again find some kind of common humanity and to be able to realize that maybe their only common humanity is how much pain both sides have. That's the starting point.
Well,
So it's
if I could, I would even say that
yeah,
even before understanding the pain in my neighbor or my enemy, so-called enemy,
yeah,
I have to understand it in myself first.
that's right.
I'm really like intimately
That's
know
right.
what's happening in me. And when that coin drops, when I really have this space, the time and the process is ripe enough for me to be with that, oh
Yeah,
my God, it disarms everything. Then I can actually feel that when
that's
I've
right.
done my trauma work, I can
That's it.
feel the trauma in others. And
That's
then
it.
it disarms everything.
That's right. And propaganda work, the psychology of propaganda is to
Yeah.
make the other, and that they have not anything
To dehumanize them. Yeah.
dehumanized, right? So,
A lot of that
and
happening these days.
a
Oh my God.
lot of, and a
Oh
lot of, and
my God, it's everywhere.
if you haven't worked on your own trauma and you have no tools to do that, the other option is to turn to violence or to support violence. So I'm really working on both
It's not
sides.
even, I think it's not even an option. It's not, excuse me, it's not perceived as an option. It's only what you can do.
That's right.
There's not even the awareness there to realize that there are other choices because it's just closed down.
And many times when we were working, I remember one young man, and when we were working in with both sides, he told his mom afterwards, and she told me he had never met a Jewish person before. And he told me afterwards that his goal was to grow up in a few years and become a suicide bomber. And he said after seeing the work that we did, he would never do that. In fact, he decided what he really wants to do is go to university.
Nice.
And that's what we're trying to do, is to say there are alternatives to hate. Dr. King and Martin Luther King in the United States, he said, you can understand why I would hate, but hatred won't get us there. So I choose love. So we want to work with people that they even have that option, right?
Yeah, what did he famously said? He said, now we need to ask ourselves, are we going to move towards conflict or are we going to move towards community?
There you
And
go.
that's the option. So
That
so let's talk about this, Gary. So the healing process, whether it's in conflict resolution or whether it's in our own process, and whether I'm healing some deep trauma or whether I'm healing my issue I have with a bike, my sister took my bicycle when I was whatever, something that perceived as minor or something really, really traumatic that is difficult. I basically see this as a 3-2-1 process. So we get split for whatever reason. We have this beautiful defense mechanism to disown a traumatic experience, to cope in that moment, to somehow stay whole. The only way to do that is to split off that which has been that part of us that's been traumatized. So it gets split off. In that moment, it was like kind of a survival mechanism, and it's kind of a good thing. But then we end up, it stays fixated, and we kind of carry that through our lives. And any type of therapeutic work, process work, I basically see as the reowning of that. And that reowning is a 3-2-1 process, which is the same thing in conflict work. So 3-2-1 basically is that because it's been pushed off and into my what I call shadow, I think you guys call it secondary processing. It gets split off.
yeah,
I'm not aware it's in me, and I
yeah,
project it out into the world.
that's
So I
right.
see those horrible people out there. It's
That's
in the
it.
third person. So
That's it.
then I call up Dr. Gary. I say, hey, listen, I got this issue with these people. Can we meet? And then you keep reflecting back to me, hey, well, tell me more about that. So I can't, at a certain point, I can't just blame them and keep talking about them. A good therapist or a good friend or a good spouse or a good whatever is going to reflect back, well, where's your response? What is it? So it's going to cause me to turn into the stressors that I have inside every time those people pop up. So
Yeah,
then that's the third person has to move into a second person, kind of a relational with the part of me that's split off. I'm not
there you
just
go.
talking about what happened, that thing that happened to me October 7th. Oh my God, blah, 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 blah. But now I'm going to talk about the emotions, the feelings, everything. So I start to have a dialogue in a way the conscious part of myself starts to have a dialogue with the unconscious part of myself. And that's what you
Yeah,
were saying before. When that comes together, there's an incredible amount of intensity, emotions, re-experiencing the trauma. Hopefully
yeah,
it's held, but that is a part that moving from third to second, from first third person to second person is a process that takes time. But when I
yeah.
can do that, and when we move close enough together, which might even be that original trauma, then I can start to take the perspective of the part that's been split off.
You got it. You got it.
Well,
You
then it's one person. Now, at that point, it starts, then only at that point does it begin to reintegrate, and I start to become whole, integrated, and healed.
you got it. You got it. I mean, in shamanism, they call that, and
Oh,
my wife
beautiful.
call it soul retrieval, right? They literally call
Soul
it
retrievers. That's so great. That's so great. It's so
part of
great. Yeah,
your
in,
soul.
in voice dialogue, they call it reowning the disowned aspect of the self. And
It just,
it's the same work that I do with somebody over there that I'm in conflict with. I stop talking about them over there, and some point we start to have that conversation together. We're back at now we're in the relational space. We want to kill each other, but Dr. Gary's kind of helping us kind of move closer energetically. We can
yes,
not kill each other, keep the violence, but and then suddenly, whoop, I get them because they are me and I am them.
they are you. We call that in process work phase three. But I
Phase
just
three,
want
there you go.
where this work shifted for me, there was a very specific moment. I was having a therapy session with Arnie Mendel, and I said to him, Arnie, I'm like 50 something, and I've worked so much on my family and this and that, and I still have these issues and this and that. And he jumped up and he said, it's because of me. And I said, who are you? And he said, Adolf Hitler.
Oh my
And
God.
he said, when now you've got to work on me. And what he meant by that, what he told me was, he said that you can't just heal yourself by working on your own psychology and your family psychology. You've got to work on your in what he called your psychological inheritance. And the psychological inheritance means everything that your family couldn't handle. So, I don't know about you, my family's Holocaust background. I remember I once said to them, well, how come we have these parties with everybody on this family and nobody from the other side? And they said, oh, they disappeared in Europe. That was the entire Holocaust discussion.
Well, how would you characterize that? Numb, just kind of avoidance,
Avoidance, we call
denial,
that one. It's too painful. Don't
too
bring it up.
painful,
But
too horrific.
it shows up to the point where now when I have a client and they describe certain symptoms to me, I ask them if they're Jewish.
Yeah, there you go.
I
Or German. The Jews and Germans are easy to figure
Yeah,
out.
no,
You
really,
talk to them in a moment.
they're either Jewish or German. You can see it because of that history.
Right.
And one of my German students was telling me her symptoms and what her family dinners are like because they never discuss her grandfather who was in the SS. And she
Mm.
and she was terrified when she told me. She said, "You'll never teach me again. You'll hate me." And I said, "Well, it's difficult, but on the other hand, our our symptoms are about the same. Our family systems are about the same. So we've got to be willing to not only look at our personal trauma, but our psychological inheritance. And so in process work and in the seminar, we'll talk about these four phases. But what you're describing is phase one is you avoid like heck. And
Right, right.
there's timing for that.
It's all far away because it's too, as it gets close, it's just too painful to be close. So it's all far away, pushed out into
It's
the third person.
it's
You
too
can't,
painful. Shock protects the system until it can process, right?
right.
And there's phase two where you really jump in and you fight and you're in conflict and you
And
really
then and then you learn how to tolerate the discomfort of that phase.
that's right. You
Because
learn to
it really means like everything I've been avoiding for all these years or for whatever. Oh my God, I gotta face it.
you got to face it. And you got to have Mendel used to call it sit in the fire. You got to sit in the fire.
The fire, right.
And then you start to go to phase
And,
three
and
where
having, sorry, just one to add to this, having a therapist and or guide and or facilitator and or teacher and or a spiritual friend and or a very good buddy
all of
in that
it,
phase is
all of it,
essential. It's essential.
all of it. It
It's
takes
almost
all,
like we're ruptured from relationship, from a bad modeled relationship, and this guide, therapist, friend gives us a healthy model that we can start to
that's right. That's right. And
sit with.
then phase three is you start to find the other in you and work on integrating. And then phase four is you go into deep meditation where
Oh,
you
wonderful.
where you let go of all of it and you use the perspective
Okay.
of the more enlightened mind.
Let's speak about Aikido because obviously we're not going to be doing the martial art of Aikido. Nobody needs to be fit for rolling around or any kind of athletic ability. But
Right.
Aikido is a principles-based martial art that has some amazing principles based in conflict resolution that are incredibly helpful. Not just helpful, but actually mirror the work that we're talking about, but it's embodied and it's relational.
So why I love Aikido so much and why it's changed my personal relationship so much and my conflict work is that it's the embodiment. It's like trauma work. You can talk to somebody's mind about trauma all the time, but trauma is stored in the body. You got to go into the body. And it's the same thing. You can talk about conflict work all the time, but if you can't do that in your body, it's not going to work when the heat comes. And so process work needs Aikido so much because it empowers our work by embodying it, right?
What I see Aikido's benefit to this, of course, it's the embodiment piece, but what exactly are we embodying? The Aikido is a beautiful model of conflict done well.
Yep.
Obviously, human beings reduced to fight, flight, freeze, even in the middle of an Aikido class, and it's not really what we would call Aikido. But in that principle, in that ideal, conflict, whether it's interpersonal, whether it's global, or whether it's the conflict that I have within myself, there are two perspectives, two truths that are trying to occupy the same place at the same time, and they can't. And that creates a certain amount of tension. There's like an energy there. And
Yeah,
that
yeah,
energy, that friction, sets off all of my biologically hardwired defense mechanisms. The bells and whistles are going off to fight, flight, freeze, whatever. We are biologically predetermined through our ancestors and through all this generational trauma to flight, to
Yeah.
freeze, to not do Aikido, to do anything but Aikido, anything but
Yes.
heal the conflict, which just perpetuates the conflict. It is a fundamentally a zero sum setting. Now,
Right.
What Aikido does, okay, now we're in conflict. Now we're in the sweet spot of the work. To stay there, to not get dragged into reactivity through all that, when that tension arises, we need a lot of awareness. That's why we practice a lot of grounding, a lot of self-regulation in Aikido. If you're not doing, we're learning all these techniques. We won't do that in the weekend, but in a normal Aikido class, we're learning all these external modalities, but really half the time we're paying attention to our internal experience and self-regulating by going from stress to center. And
There you go.
only when I've really regulated myself firmly in my center, then am I in the center of choice on how to
Mm,
respond to the
mm,
stress that is arising. And then what happens is that the energy that's occupying this place, that the two energies that are occupying the same place at the same time that can't that bring about all the stress, there's no solution. A zero-sum solution is one wins, the other wins, one loses, one loses. The best we can do in that situation, as you know, is to agree to disagree. It's a better choice, but it's still not completely satisfying because it's not a healing. The real healing is to stay with that and realize that the energy that's created in that tension actually wants to go someplace.
mm,
It may not, it's not my agenda. It's
mm.
not the other person's agenda. But when we come together in the interface, that energy wants to go someplace. If both of us allow it to go someplace, it automatically leads to harmony, automatically. And
Beautiful.
the process to do that is huge. It is process work. It is the healing work. It is world work. It is conflict
Yeah.
work. It is the whole ball
Yeah.
of wax.
And it's mysterious. I've been studying with the Takeda Sensei now about 5 years and
Yeah.
starting to understand his work a little bit. But, here's this man, and, I mean, I attack him. I don't know what happens. I just know I'm on the ground. And one time, and I often laugh. One time, he said, "Why are you laughing so hard?" I said, I thought you were going to throw me through the ceiling energetically. And that's what we're trying to learn in process work. And that's what you're teaching people in Aikido, and that's what he's teaching people. I
Well,
tell
and
you,
in conflict resolution too, because
conflict.
if I can just comment on what you said, the
Yeah,
reason you were laying on the floor laughing is because
yeah.
everything in your system said yes. Yeah, that's where I want to go. Okay, I ended up on the floor, but it doesn't feel like zero sum.
No, it
It's
doesn't.
my own energy. My own
That
energy took me to the floor, and he
yes.
just skillfully directed it.
What I noticed internally was anytime anybody challenged me, especially as a small man, I would be all adrenalized. I would be ready to go. And something started to change through Aikido.
Oh, well, there you go. I mean, and again, in the end of the day, any kind of conflict resolution, it does take two to tango. We can't what do you say? We can't magically get into another person's mind body system and make them be in harmony with us. But the best we can do is we can meet them where we can, from a centered place, we meet them where they're at,
Yes.
and we don't add fuel to the fire.
But that's taken so long in me. And my Aikido
Well,
teacher,
because us human beings aren't designed to do that.
we're
We're
not,
designed to fight, flight, freeze, to add fuel, add
that's right.
karmic fuel to all conflict, and it just perpetuates.
But not
Oh
only
yeah.
individually, as countries, we're so wired. And so you and I are trying to say there is another option, but it's a middle way. It's not like
It's a middle way. Beautiful. Thank you for saying that.
I'm not protecting myself. I'm not saying, oh, come and bomb my country, do whatever you want. I'm trying
Well,
to do something that's more effective. I tried to do something more effective than fighting him. Fighting him, I might have gotten hurt. Um,
well, I love it, Gary. I teach something called the Aikido Koan.
what do
The
you
Aik-
call it?
the Aikido Koan.
Yeah.
And it's basically based on, when we're confronted with conflict, we usually there's three kind of egoic moves. There's many, but three basic ones, and we can either be aggressive or passive in conflict,
Yes.
or passive aggressive, which is the secret one, right? Which is that sneaky one that we get power by pretending we don't have power. But
Exactly.
those are the three kind of egoic moves, and each one of those moves just perpetuate conflict. So the Aikido koan is
Wow.
in the midst of conflict. We say to ourselves, number one,
Wow.
I'm not aggressive.
Mm,
Number two, I'm not passive.
mm,
Number three, I'm not passive aggressive.
mm.
Then number
Beautiful.
four, who am I?
Woo!
So we negate every egoic move. We negate the aggression. We negate the passivity. We negate the passive aggressiveness. And then we ask, who am I, while still staying in conflict or still staying connected with the stress of the conflict?
Woo! Boy, I love that.
Now, then what's going to happen from there? I don't know. But whatever happens from there, it is the process of healing. It is
Wow.
the process of healing.
Wow. That's
And,
so
and
exciting. I can't wait to teach with you. That is so
No, it's
exciting.
going to be great. It's going to be great because
That
it's also what we're
little
doing in our own internal healing. We play games with ourselves. We play games with each other. We learn these ego strategies our whole life. That's how we
uh,
survive and cope. And now we're basically pulling out the fuel or removing the fuel from those strategies and dropping into being and dealing with what's there. And
beautiful.
that's actually the healing process.
It is, and it's got to be an embodied process. Like I say, if somebody grabs me and I have so much adrenaline and I'm ready to kill and whatever, I can tell myself, oh, do conflict work, but I'm all split. But eventually you do enough of this work where if you need all that fight and adrenaline, you can have it, but we have options, right?
We have
We have
options.
options. We can say, actually, if I bomb your country, you're going to bomb my country, and you're going to bomb my country. But war is an extreme state. War, war, you act and then you think, right? You act and then you feel. Listen, I remember I was working with a soldier there on his post-traumatic stress in Israel, and he had been in the front lines, and he said the first thing they do is they teach us to not think and then to not feel, and that's what
Mhm.
we need to survive on those front lines, right? But he said, but now he was becoming a therapist. He said, how do I turn the switch back on? I need to think, I need to feel. And so the kind of warriorship that we're building, we don't want people to have to turn that off. We want to turn that on. We want all yourself here.
It's
And
so beautiful. And it's like you said, we have options. And the thing is, we have options that we don't even see, and we won't see them until we step into the shadows.
you
Can I
got
can
it.
I can I finish with one little or
Please.
you can finish it, but a story from you're an Aikido man, so you'll like this. The Tengu, the Japanese Tengu.
Okay, tell me this.
So the Tengu, yeah, they're the mythological demons in Japan. They
Oh,
live in the mountains outside of Kyoto. There's a big sacred mountain called Koya. And these demons are demonic spiritual warriors. They're half human and half crow.
oh,
And
wow.
and there's a king. There's the Dai Tengu. These are the Tengu. The crow. They got a crow beak and I think they have human hands, but they got crow feet and they got wings and they carry swords. And the Dai Tengu is also the crow, but he has a long phallic nose,
Oh,
and he's the boss of them all. And what would happen is when a samurai would study, they would go from dojo to dojo, study from master to master, and they would perfect their art. And they wanted to go beyond beyond the relative perfection. They would go seek out the Tengu for spiritual training. And to do that, they would have to leave their master. They would go up into the mountains by themselves, off the beaten path, deep into the shadows of the mountains where there are no human beings. And only when they were exhausted in their search to find the Tengu, and really they kind of collapsed, then the Tengu would descend from the trees, from the shadows, and surround the samurai. They would all pull out their swords and hold the sword above their heads, ready to kill the samurai. And then the Dai Tengu, the one with the long phallic nose, he would drop down in front of the samurai and he would reach in and pull out his mirror. The mirror is it's a spiritual um, um, symbol of enlightenment, of awakening. And he would put it in front of the face of the samurai. And what the mirror would reflect is his true nature. And if the samurai showed fear, fight, flight, or freeze in reflection of that mirror, the Tengus would cut him to pieces. They'd kill him.
Woo!
But if he could stay
Mm,
present, grounded centers, and not react, but
mm.
be with what he was seeing, the Tengu would all kneel down and bow down, and they would become his servant.
Ooh,
And it's such a, it's
what
some
a beautiful
Japanese
story.
mythology, but it's also such a beautiful metaphor for shadow work. We go
Beautiful.
deep into the shadows and we face what we couldn't face. We exhaust ourselves sometimes, to where we fall apart, and then the work, if we can stay there with awareness and with presence, then the healing work can happen. And all of our shadows are all the devils out there and the demons in here, they actually become our, I mean, it's kind of Jungian, no? They become our servants. They teach us. They become our teachers.
Same in process work. Your biggest allies are your most negative figures in your childhood dream. So Linda would say we just work on that dream our whole life to integrate those powers, and
And then they
that's
become your power. Yeah.
they
Then they
become your
become your power. You become empowered by the very thing that we were afraid of, that we were
yes.
trying to battle, not just in ourselves, but out there in the world, all the poor people that we come across. And we're really just battling our own demons. My God, we're inflicting our own trauma on other people. Now, God bless us all. Gary.
Oh, and
Dr.
good.
Gary, we need this work.
Yeah, we need this work. Let's do it. And also, I just want to say, I know your work and in Aikido and in process work, we work trauma informed, and that means trauma informed does means that we don't teach people, oh, I'm coming to swim, I want to learn how to swim, so we don't throw them in like the middle of the ocean. We
That's
hold
right.
people, and it's trauma informed.
Yeah.
Uh, so what trauma informed means for me is that whatever discomfort you go through in processing trauma, there's a net gain. It's not that we re-traumatize you and put you back in there. It's that we put you in a little enough that you can step out, right? So
Beautiful.
if
And
people
maybe one more thing, Carrie, we should, anybody's welcome to join us in this weekend of healing the polarization that we see in ourselves, healing the polarization in the world, Aikido and process work, or process work and Aikido. Everyone's a welcome to join, but we really are kind of orienting this towards teachers, therapists, facilitators who are already deep into this work and want to have another modality, especially an embodied modality, but not only embodied. We're going to be doing a lot of cool exercises, a lot of cool practices that actually help, that they can take directly into their groups and the people they're working with.
facilitators, therapists, body workers, medical people, uh,
Meditation teachers, it's
organizational facilitators, coaches, sometimes somebody with who's brand new or whatever, it just is called and they can be really gifted in this work or they really need this work. So
to be honest, especially now here in Israel, Palestine, where the trauma is pretty acute.
uh,
Um, the fixation that comes along with that, and then all the perpetuation of, you know, generations of more trauma, it's just really acute and it gets intensified. And if somebody is really, look, right now we're still maybe just kind of healing, but you and I both know that the world needs people who are not just healed, not just whole, but are ready to step up and help others become healed and whole. And
beautiful.
if we can't do it,
Who will if
there's
we can.
no hope. Oh, who will? There you go. There
Right?
you go.
You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to practice. It's just
Yeah,
practice.
beautiful. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just practice, right? Gary, thank you so much.